So I suspect most everyone knows me already. My name is Paul Jones, one of the developers from the Grand Rapids Configure office. Um, been there for 8 years, part of dev training for about 6 or so. Yeah, we're going to be walking through the migration to 11.5. For those of you who haven't been part of a Zoom webinar before, you may have noticed that it looks and works a little bit differently. Um, as it starts, not everyone has the ability to unmute themselves. If you have a question as we're going, hit that raise your hand button towards the bottom, and I'll monitor I'll try and monitor who has raised their hand, so I'll be able to get to your questions when I get to a good spot. Or if you'd prefer, there's also a Q&A tool towards the bottom. You can type in a question, it will get added to a list. That also gives everyone else the opportunity to see your question and upvote it or add comments to it or anything like that. When we get to the end, I'll go through all of the questions that are in there and I'll answer them. So let's get started. So one thing I want to call out first is that this is not meant to be a replacement for reading through the migration guide. This is more a supplement. I'm not going to go through everything that's in the migration guide, like line by line. Mostly this is just for explaining some of the things that have changed that are worth a bit more explanation. For the things that are more straightforward, just an interface change or a method name change or something like that, I'll not be going through those. It's fair enough just to read through the migration guide for those. I'm going to start out with a couple things that aren't actually migration. Just two things I want to call out real quick that aren't migrations, but there are two new things that have been added in 11.5 that are worth mentioning that you might want to look into. First is a new accessory system that has been added to, oh wow, Abstract, right. You may have heard it described before as an automatic support system. When it was originally designed, that was sort of the intent, but realized that it didn't really have to be specific to that. So it's been generalized out to a point where it can handle placing any core object on any prop object by defining some rules and like constraints and stuff. You can have automatic placement of things on other things. Automatic supports make a lot of sense, but they could be it could be used for handling other things like placing electrical or tiles or something like that. As I said, this is down in CM Abstract. If you're interested in seeing some example of this, it is used in the new Data Fika Office for work surface supports. And speaking of Data Fika Office, that is a thing as of 11.5. This is a recreation of Fika Office, like a one-to-one recreation. Instead using Abstract Data Office. So this is our like data-driven Abstract Office. So this is a data-driven extension. Currently, it is only available in develop mode. There is a flag in the code that you can flip to turn it on. And we're planning on releasing this actually like to the users and swapping this out for the existing Fika Office in 12.0. At which point this would go to some like legacy code area where it can be referred to. Okay, a kind of migration change. The base repo, the internal projects are going to have their branch naming conventions change starting with 11.5. So for the two released branches, they will be following the scheme you see here. So version 11.5 official for all the code that is released to the end users, and version /11.5/beta for all the code that has been put into a beta build, into like that pre-official beta box. So both of these branches represent something that has already been, built and put out there. It's should be pretty stable. Beta is obviously slightly less stable than official just because we might find something we want to change before release, but these are both valid targets we're building against for extensions. There are also a handful of, I think of them as development branches for upcoming landmarks, or mile markers, I should say. Um, for example, a release 11.5 major. This is the development branch for the 11.5 major release. I call them development branches because they will be shifting over time as new tickets and fixes and whatnot get worked on. They'll be merged into one of these branches. So it is a bit of a moving target. The idea being that they will become a bit more consistent as we approach like code freezes and feature freezes. We'll probably announce that it's a good time to do migration. We'll say, check out release 11.5 patch 1, for example, as something to build against just to make sure that everything is going to run smooth when that goes live. Property stretch animation has had some house cleaning done to it. For those of you who have seen the property stretch animation core class, that there used to be one like really big monolithic, like 3 pages long method, super stretch, that contained all of the code to actually perform all the stretching. That has been, for one, moved to stretch to be more consistent with other stretch animations. It has also been broken up a fair amount. Specifically, the parts that are the most likely to be you're most likely to want to modify if you're creating your own subclasses of property stretch animation. So in a lot of cases, property stretch animation is subclass for the sake of handling how that snapper moves in a special way, or having a custom behavior on super stretch. These have all been moved out to their own methods now, so subclassing this should be a lot easier now. You don't need to copy that entire, I don't know how many lines it was, 40, 50 lines of code, maybe more, just to change how the value gets set or something like that. I suspect it's fairly unusual to subclass core properties, but just in case anyone is, there has been a couple small changes. We were doing double bookkeeping on locked properties. We had both this set of locked properties as well as the properties themselves keeping track of whether or not they were locked. So it was kind of redundant. In 11.5, that's been removed so that now only the properties themselves actually hold that locked state or information. The method that has been named the same as the old field, locked properties on core properties, just returns a set of all of the properties that have been locked. So the interface is almost the same, but internally it's a bit different. ABS component has been deprecated. As 11.5, the class has been marked as deprecated with plans to have it actually removed entirely as of 12.0. This is mostly because it's been found that the ABS component, as it was written, was pretty specific to Office interior extensions. The way it handled, well, basically the way it handled its instancing and caching and parts and stuff like that, were all pretty focused on how Office does these kinds of things. So it made sense to, instead of having it be this completely out there component, that it should in fact live inside of Abstract Office, and that's what the new AO component is. This is basically a drop-in replacement for ABS component. It was actually made just by copying ABS component. So for the most part, it's the exact same thing. The only difference is it's had its dimensions. There were some fields for dimensions and also a bunch of methods interacting with those dimensions. All of that stuff was removed just to open it up so you can use whatever dimensions you like. If for some reason you do absolutely need ABS component as it is today, it is recommended that you just copy it from where it is and place it in your extension. But for almost all purposes, AO component should be a good replacement. Abstract Office as a whole has seen quite a few changes in 11.5, mostly revolving around taking a lot of the stuff that was in Abstract Office and bringing it out. So this is kind of the opposite of what we were doing with Abs Component. Over the years, we found there's a lot of stuff in AO that gets used by other industries, so kitchen, labs, material handling, a whole bunch of stuff in there that's not really specific to Abstract Office. And so you ended up with a whole lot of extensions that weren't even Office extensions that were dependent on Abstract Office because of its parts or its materials or comm materials or sorry, my headset cut out. So the idea with these changes was to pull all these things out either into new abstracts or down into the base abstract package so that in the cases where you did just need a couple pieces that was an abstract office, you might not need that dependency anymore. So this slide, I'm calling it emptied classes. What these are classes that still exist in Abstract Office. However, they have been emptied out in 11.5. If you go and look for them in Abstract Office, you'll still find them, but the class will be empty. They'll just be extending one of these new equivalent classes. So the overall interface is the same. They all work the same way. The code has been moved down to these new classes that have been pulled into other abstracts. But otherwise, they're exact same thing. If you have a dependency on Office part today, it's perfectly fine to have a dependency on it, in 11.5. It's just when you go to look at the code, you're going to see that class is empty now. It's all been moved to this other class. This has all been a one-to-one change with the exception of chair placer. Chair placer, for those who don't know, it's just it's a helper for placing, well, as it sort of implies, it's to help place chairs around some other snapper. However, there wasn't actually any code in there specific to chairs. So in this move, it's been renamed to Snapper Placer. And a couple of the things that used to say chair, like a field called chair or method called chair, so on and so forth, they've just been renamed to say Snapper instead. Otherwise, there's no difference. There wasn't even any references to chair classes inside the chair placer anyway, so functionally it's the exact same thing. Just some fields and methods have changed names. All right, so the classes and their related functions have moved directly to abstract. So all these guys you see here have been moved down to abstract. Either, they've been moved down to abstract. The ones you see with an asterisk, these are the ones that were also on that slide I just had up, meaning that these classes as written here still exist in AO, but their contents have been moved out to abstract. Others have been just straight up moved. However, in the move, it didn't really make sense to call them Office anymore, so they have, in these cases, been renamed. But otherwise, they are the exact same thing. There have been no changes to them or how they work. Abstract material. There were a whole bunch of materials relevant to materials in Abstract Office, and these have all been moved out to abstract material. The ones in asterisks, like I said, these are ones that the original class still exists in AO, it's just been emptied out. And as before, ones that have something like Office in them have been renamed in the move to just be like abs material or something like that. But otherwise, all the functionality is the same. All the methods and interfaces are the same. Part. This is just grabbing the classes and related functions relevant to parts, just pulling them out to their own abstract as well. Same story. Also, Office Walls has been moved out, so now it's just its own extension under Abstract. Um, Beyond this move, there haven't been any changes to it. Some actual code changes. Work Surface now extends Model 3D Snapper. Before it was extending Taggable Snapper. Basically, this is just because Work Surface was doing a lot of things that was essentially identical to what Model 3D Snapper and Graph Snapper were doing. So it just made sense to, instead of replicating code, redundant code, let's just come right off of Model 3D Snapper. This does mean that there are some new fields. These fields are all stream null, so there shouldn't be any issues with load code or anything like that. In fact, really the only reason why you might need to write anything in terms of migration is if you were in one of your subclasses handling similar functionality yourself, like handling the caching of graphics. You might want to consider ripping that out and just using what Model 3D Snapper is using, or maybe just making some tweaks so that it works side by side, just depending on what you need. The domain method on work surface has been renamed to dimension domain. This was done to avoid confusion and conflict with the domain method on prop object. They had the identical name and similar argument lists, so it made it real easy to get the two mixed up. So just it's been renamed. Otherwise, it works identical to before. The connectors method on work surface now invokes super. It didn't before. All this really means is that your connector sequence will now include push connectors. If you're not pushing connectors, this isn't a change. The only reason this might be changed is if you were using push connectors, you probably added something to your connectors method to get them pushed in or get them added to the collection. You're going to want to take that out now just to avoid duplicate references. These next two are technically a bug fix. I'm just calling them out in case in one of your subclasses you handled the bug fix yourself. You might want to consider not. There was an issue with work surfaces snapping to panels with an off mod on their up-down line. Basically, the fix was removing some code from connect line lines in panel frame that was interacting with edge limit. After removing this stuff, the snapping fixed up. So if you are doing anything to handle this, you might want to try ripping that code out and see if this fix works for you. I suspect it's pretty unusual to a subclass Canvas, but just in case, there have been some interface changes to the Canvas class and its subclasses. All the methods that draw arcs and circles have had a new optional argument added to them for either refinement or angle resolution, but these are optional arguments. The distance unit enum has had two of its members removed. Inches and decimals and feet and inches and decimals have both been removed from this enum. This is most because in all cases we found these two entries were redundant. Inches and decimals always perform the same as inches. Feet and inches and decimals always perform the same as feet and inches. So we instead just removed these decimal variants and just have a package renamer now that whenever those entries are unstreamed, we replace them with inches or feet and inches. If you are using the distance enum type anywhere you're in an extension, the load code should be already set up. This package renamer should take care of it. The only reason why it wouldn't take care of it for you is if you're storing your distance unit, if you're storing it in some other way. For example, if you're storing it as an integer, then you would need to manually handle this in load code. Data symbol, the snapper from Abstract Data Symbol, exposes prop defs a little bit differently now. In the past, 11.0 and earlier, it was exposing the DSP data directly. It no longer does this. Instead, it exposes its multi-data. This change was done in conjunction with some changes to multi-data. 11.0 and earlier, when you exposed your multi-data, the exposure visitor would get hijacked to expose that multi-data's actual datas directly to the caller rather than through the multi-data. That's been changed now. As of 11.5, when you expose your multi-data, it will automatically expose all of its datas to itself and then do normal exposure on itself as well. So this means that the path of exposure better matches the object ownership hierarchy. This also makes a lot of things. It resolves a lot of conflicts, naming conflicts, and it also, in at least some cases, works easier with things like propagate and sometimes schemes and stuff like that. Right. This is only a point of migration if you are handling exposure of your data in your extension. If you're yourself changing how that data gets exposed, you might have to revisit that. If you were already getting your multi-data to expose in this pattern, like I just described, you might be able to just rip out the code that you have in there. Also consider that this will mean the keys. If you weren't exposing in this pattern, your keys might have changed, and you want to make sure you're ready for that. Some changes to CM-SIM. The SIM owner node has been replaced by this new SIM graph. SIM owner node was causing a lot of confusion and strange results. SIM owner node was itself a node, but it wasn't actually a node within the tree. So a lot of developers were like struggling with this because since it's a node, you'd think you could treat it like a node and add components to it and things like that, and have it make a change, but that wasn't actually the case. It wasn't actually part of the tree, just held the tree. So that's why this SIMGraph object has been created. It only exists to hold the tree. It is not itself a node. It has on it a field for root, which contains the root node of that SIM tree or SIM graph. SIM handle has been updated to contain a SIM graph reference. This is how it actually, this is like one of the two bits it needs to actually refer to an element within the SIM tree. It needs the graph as well as that set of keys to specify a node within the tree. The caching key for caching these SIM trees was being stored via a prop SIM owner cache key for the key. This has been replaced in favor of a method on a pre-core prop object called SIMGraph key. This is just a method that generates a caching key for your SIM graph. Iterating through the nodes within your SIM graph via sim.graph is removed in 11.5. Instead, sim.iter should be used. Otherwise, it functions the same way. It's still, like the for syntax still allows for the custom CM-SIM for syntax stuff like component filters. SimExec has been removed. Developers were using this as a way to trigger like an update to their sim graphics once they are done, like as part of like manipulating their sim tree. That has been removed. Going forward, developers should use begin edit and end edit to indicate that they're beginning to edit and then finalizing their changes to the sim graph. or you can use this sim edit syntax, which is basically the same thing. It just puts in those for you. Picking on CM-Sim has changed a little bit. I believe most of this change was to deal with the fact that in a lot of situations when you're having picking on your sim graph, you don't really care about the pick surface. The pick surface is really just a vehicle to handle picking, whereas this new system is a bit more direct. Um, Basically, you add a sim pick info component to your to a node, and then in click animation, you can just pull that pick info right off. So you can just put data right onto a node, and if the user clicks on that node, you can pull the data right out again. You don't have to go through a pick surface to make that happen. However, if for some reason you do need that pick surface, you still can via the picksim method on that end. That'll get you the pick surface. And last couple of changes I want to talk about. We've added some metadata to builds that are updated from Build Center. You can now specify a type of the update that is included in the build. By default, it assumes it's just a minor content update, but you can specify either minor or major content updates, minor or major new features, minor or major bug fixes, or critical bug fixes. These changes were just part of our a recent initiative to make the whole update experience easier for end users. Users they've been reporting that they have a lot of difficulty knowing when they have to update and trying to prioritize and schedule their updates so it doesn't interfere with their work. And this is part of making that easy for them. By marking what kind of update this build is to the users, they can better judge whether or not they need to get that update right away, or if they can get by putting it off to a little bit later, or something like that. All of these update types are the same. It's just information for the user to read, with the exception of critical bug fixes. That's the only one that's treated any differently. If you push out a build and mark it as a critical bug fix, the user will be forced to download it and install it right away. So normally users can delay their updates for a while. I think we're working on giving the users a chance to actually schedule their updates as well. But this critical bug fix type will bypass all of that. If a critical bug fix goes out, it forces users to download and install right away. For obvious reasons, you don't want to put this on any builds you don't need to. But if you do have some kind of a critical issue, maybe orders aren't going through correctly or parts aren't doing correctly, something that has to get out as fast as possible, this will just make sure that it gets to the users as fast as can be. There's also a new column you can see on the right there for adding release notes. You add a URL to a web page, any web page you like. Could be a briefcase, could be a partner website. I mean, wherever you have the release notes posted. And what this will do is if you have that URL in there, when the user gets their update notification, it will include this new clickable link, this what's new link. And if they click it, it'll open up that page so they can see your release notes. And you can also see here that that update type being listed out here. But that is actually it. Are there any questions? Okay. Well, what I'll do is I will hang out here in the webinar for a couple more minutes just in case anyone thinks of anything they want to ask. But otherwise, just want to thank you everyone for giving me your attention. I appreciate it. But yeah, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Got a couple of questions in here. What is different between major branch and beta branch? The difference between them is basically where the code is in build boxes. So the version 11.5 official branch is for the code that has been actually put into the release box, so sent out to the end users. Whereas the beta branch is the stuff that's been built into the beta build box and released to our beta users. So both of them represent stuff that has been built and shipped to either the release box or the beta box. Can SuperStretch, now stretch, be overridden, customized with specific behavior? Yes, it can. That's been done a couple times. So for example, if you want to handle SuperStretch in a custom way, or you want to change how values get pushed back to the snapper on stretch or something like that, that can all be subclassed and modified. In fact, it's a lot easier to do now. Could have been done before, but it was a lot of work, a lot of copying code. It's just been made easier now. Does SimPickInfo help to create SimPick surface automatically? I believe so. I've gotten kind of conflicting feedback from those I've talked to. I've had a couple of people suggest that pick surfaces are always created all the time anyway, which seems a bit strange, but it's definitely the case that if you have a SimPickInfo added to your node, a pick surface will be created to match. So it is an easier way to make those and assign those. Another question came in. What was the thought process behind the renaming of the branches, and is it encouraged or expected for others to follow? The idea behind the names as they're written, it's well, for one, it's taking advantage of a kind of a quirk with a Git. Actually, let me just bring up those slides. There we go. So those slashes have a funny side effect in Git. Git will actually do things like putting the branches into special folders, which makes them easier to find and parse out. And overall, it just interacts with DevOps a bit better. It's a lot easier to write code to do things like automatic building and testing and stuff like that. That's all that's really behind that, just to make our automatic DevOps easier. Is it encouraged or expected for others to follow? Not right now. This change was purely for the sake of improving DevOps on the base repo, the core projects. However, I don't think we've quite decided what this is going to mean for other extensions. It's possible we're going to start expanding our DevOps so that partner extensions can interact as well, like free automatic, regression testing of other extensions, possibly, or things like that. And if that happens, likely we would require other extensions to switch this convention, but it's all really way too early to even talk about that stuff. So for now, like the official stance is no, this is only for the base repo. Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and end the webinar then. But again, thank you everyone for your attention. I really appreciate it. And, have a good one.